All right, everyone, good morning. We might get started and I can just let a few more people in as they appear. So welcome to our first weekly webinar around supporting your immune health during this time. If you don't know us, we are a functional medicine clinic here in Melbourne, and we help people with chronic health conditions to get their health back on track through functional medicine combined also with health coaching. For those of you who don't know me, I am Courtney and I'm the practice manager here at Melbourne Functional Medicine, and I'm just going to be managing your questions throughout the webinar today. Our functional medicine practitioner and our principal functional medicine practitioner, Jabe Brown, will be answering your questions and sharing insights into the coronavirus and giving you some tips and insight into how you can strengthen immunity during this time in a functional medicine approach. So we are using Zoom and we are also streaming live on Facebook currently. So those of you that are joining us through Zoom, you won't be able to talk or interact with us in that way, but how you can ask your questions is if you go down to the bottom of your video window, there should be a section that says chat. If you click on that, it'll open up a little chat box and you can type in your questions there, and I'll be keeping an eye on them and making sure that I'm feeding them through to Jabe. Those of you that are live on Facebook, you can pop your questions down in the comments below and we'll make sure that they get through to Jabe. So let's begin, and I'm just going to hand it straight over to Jabe.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending. I'm looking forward to taking your questions today, but I thought what we might do first is just have a bit of a brief overview of Corona overall, and then I'll move on to away from the stat stuff and more towards what you can do and how you can protect yourself and look after your immune system. And so we're in a state at the moment where the stats are all a little bit jumbled, and I won't spend a ton of time on them, but you can find out these things yourself by going to the WHO website. So I think it's who.org, and you can find the stats there pretty easily. But at the moment, it's looking like mortality rates about 4.35% as of a few minutes ago. But if you look at the case rate is increasing dramatically over time around the world. And both of those are a little misleading in that we're not sure what's going on with actual cases, and we can only confirm cases that have either been tested or when someone dies from it. And so there'll be a whole lot of people who have coronavirus who don't come up on any of those statistics at all. And so mortality rate is likely to actually be a lot lower than that, and case rate is actually likely to be a lot higher. And the reason for that is that for most people, about 80% of them will recover from coronavirus with no complications, and many of those will have no symptoms at all. And so they're just not going to be in those statistics at all. And even in Australia, if you do have symptoms, but if you haven't been in contact with someone with a confirmed case or have recently traveled overseas, you're not going to get tested. And so even if you have coronavirus with symptoms, you're not going to be in those statistics. So the statistics are all a little bit up in the air, and true mortality rate, I think, will be a little lower than that. It's more likely to be somewhere from 1% through to 4%. But what we do know is that the population groups that are most affected, there are 3 of them, and that's those with advancing age, which, kind of 70 plus, but there's no hard rule on that. Those that are immune compromised, and those that have an existing disease condition, so something cardiovascular or respiratory related. And so those people tend to be more affected. It looks like the younger you are, the less you are affected, but we're not. The young people are not as bulletproof as we would have thought, a week or 2 ago. It turns out that they are at risk as well. And so coronavirus is actually it's in the family of the SARS viruses. So SARS and MERS are both corona family viruses, and so we've had those. 20 years. 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 And so we've had those. very, very quickly. And so this is kind of a variant on those in the same way that influenza mutates, and you see different strains of it. And so what we're calling COVID-19 is, really the more technical term for coronavirus, or the disease condition produced by coronavirus, whereas the virus itself is called SARS-CoV-2. Now, the thing that has got people in a panic about this one, and probably rightly so, is the infectiousness of it. So when we have a contagious disease, there's this thing called an R0, and that's basically, if one person has the condition, how many people will they infect on average? And so something like seasonal influenza has an R0 of around about 1.3, and we're not sure, but the R0 of coronavirus is looking like somewhere around about 2.3 to 2.6, meaning for everyone who has it, on average, 2.3 or 2.6 people are going to get infected, which is a hugely different rate to the seasonal flu. And for those that get it badly, mortality rate is a lot higher than seasonal influenza, which is about 0.1%, as opposed to our estimate of 1 through to 4% for coronavirus. And so the best strategy by far, and I know that you know all this stuff and you can find it out, I just want to go through it briefly though. Best strategy by far is isolate. So social distancing is your best strategy. And so that means keeping your distance when you are around people. So 1 to 2 meters is probably good. Isolate, stay at home so you're not exposed to people. But also cleanliness. And so the single biggest intervention you can do, what the data is saying, is wash your hands. And so wash them thoroughly. And the CDC says 20 seconds with soap all over your hands, front, back, under your nails. And 20 seconds is 2 singings of the Happy Birthday song. And so wash your hands, but keep clean surfaces you are in control of, and wipe, or don't touch surfaces you're not in control of. Wash your hands afterwards. And those really are the primary sort of avoidance measures. But I'm sure that people will be wondering about what we call personal protective equipment, which is things like face masks. Now, if everyone wore face masks, that would help. Unfortunately, that's just not tenable. We don't have enough for that. And so there's all talk about there to try and convince people that they're not effective so we can save masks for health workers, etc. But the population group that really should be wearing them if they're out and about are those that are affected by coronavirus, but they really shouldn't be out and about. They should be isolating at home. And so they can be effective if you are wearing them and you don't want to contract, but you need to make sure you're not touching them. And when you take them off, then don't touch the bits that are all going to be affected. So use the straps and take them off there. Now, that stuff is stuff that I'm sure people can find elsewhere. What I want to spend the rest of today's session on is talking about what you can do for your immune health. But before I get onto that, I might just throw Courtney. Are there any questions people wanted to ask about stuff I've been talking about so far?
Yeah, so we just got one question. Do we need to worry about coronavirus on our clothing?
Well, it can live for a long time on surfaces. It can live up to 9 days on surfaces. Now, that depends on the surface and it depends on the environment, the conditions. Coronavirus does not like heat. And so in hot conditions, then it's not going to last anywhere near as long. And in terms of clothes, I'm not exactly sure how long it does live on clothes, but logic says yes, because if you are able to contract coronavirus through your face mask, which is a cloth surface, and so you don't touch it on the outside, then the same would apply to your clothes. And so I would suggest yes, but I'm not sure that means you need to go and sterilize all your clothes all of the time. And I'm not sure exactly how long it will live on clothes, but up to 9 days on surfaces.
When you say hot, it doesn't like heat. What classifies as hot as an uncomfortable temperature for the virus?
Okay, so there's a couple of things. So it's like in the same way as the influenza class of viruses, people tend to be more infectious during the colder seasons, so during winter. And that's because the respiratory droplets survive for longer. And so SARS is primarily passed through respiratory droplets. So as you breathe, there's moisture in your body, and those droplets go out into the world, which is why we suggest avoidance of that 1 to 2 meters, because the respiratory droplets go out and then they kind of drop down. Now, in hot weather, infection rates don't seem to be as high. And we're not exactly sure why that is, but it might be because the respiratory droplets evaporate more quickly in the heat. And so in terms of, if you were in an environment where there is coronavirus around, if that environment were warmer, there'd be less of a risk of you contracting it. And so in terms of exactly what that is, well, coronavirus is a virus and doesn't like heat. And so 40 degrees centigrade tends to be a bit of a magic temperature internally in the body. So if you contract coronavirus, one of the things your body's going to try and do is it's going to try and throw up a fever, which is an intentional and desired response by the body to kill the virus. And so you don't, unless it's getting really up there, you don't really want to be bringing that down, because that's the way your body's getting rid of it. And so if it's doing that at kind of that 39, 40 degrees, then logic would suggest that the same rules apply environmentally. Now, I don't think that means you need to heat your home to 40 degrees. I think that's entirely impractical, but it's probably better to be kind of that 20, maybe 25, as opposed to kind of saving money with your heater and rugging up under your blanket at 18 or 14 or whatever it is. So warm is generally best, but I mean, if you're at home isolating and you're not been exposed to it, it's really not going to change too much. But the other thing while we're on temperature is that's one of the little hacks that you can use to decrease your risk of getting it. So there was a study done in a nursing home where they did one intervention only, and that was they had people gargle green tea 3 times daily, 1 cup of green tea. And those that did that were 15 times less likely to get influenza than those who did not. And so that might be because of the tannins in the green tea, but in large parts to do with the temperature. So hot water is useful. Now, obviously, don't burn yourself. We don't want boiling water, but just like a nice warm tea that you can do. It probably doesn't have to be green. And if you gargle, what you're doing is you're killing things locally. So given that coronavirus, it's those respiratory droplets. Well, respiratory droplets you're going to breathe in. And so you're breathing in through your nose and through your mouth. And there's a lot of gunky stuff there. That's where all of your mucus production is. And so what can happen is that those little coronavirus get stuck in all your mucus goop. And so gargling is giving you local exposure and is killing the virus before it gets into your cells. Now, I rabbited on a little bit there, Courtney. I think I kind of answered that, but what else have we got there? That
no, that's some extra information. That was great. So 2 questions for you, just on the virus living on surfaces. Just one question about, do we need to be concerned about the packets of food we bring into our home? So the virus living on things that we're bringing into our home. So that's the first question. I'll let you answer that, and then I will let you know what the second is.
Well, it's a really good question. I haven't thought about it before, but if someone coughs on a packet of food, then that is going to be an infection risk, because then you're going to touch it and then you're going to move your hand straight to your face, because we can't help it. We're always doing it. And so I want to say, technically, yes. Practically speaking, I think it depends on what people are doing with food. I like to think people aren't going around and coughing all over it. And we're hoping that those that are infected are staying home and isolating. But I suppose technically, yes. I'm not sure how much that would change my my behavior around it. But I suppose yes. And so while I'm on that, actually, what I didn't speak about is incubation period, and which is part of the problem that we're having. It's currently looking like, and the details are moving around, but it's currently looking like the average incubation period is 5 days. Now, incubation period means the time since you were exposed until you develop symptoms. So on average, it's looking like you were exposed to someone who had coronavirus 5 days ago, and then you'll start getting symptoms today. But it does appear that it can be less time than that, obviously, if it's an average. And 14 days is what most people are suggesting as is the upper limit, but there's some data that's saying up to 24 days. Now, the issue is that you are going to be infectious before you get symptoms. And so if you've got symptoms after 5 days, you're probably infectious from somewhere around 3, which means you're not thinking that you need to isolate because you're symptom free, and then you're going around and that's at the infection time. And the other thing is for the population group of especially the younger people, but many people just don't get any symptoms at all, even when they do have it. And so the isolation thing really only kind of works if everyone's doing it. But yeah. Sorry, Courtney, what was the second question?
The second question is from Rosie, and she just wants to know, how long does it take for the aerosol respiratory droplets to settle out of the air? So just going back to what you were talking before about how those airborne.
Yeah, so that again depends on the environment, and so when it's cold, we think they tend to hang around longer, and the theory is because they don't evaporate as quickly. And so in the warmth, the respiratory droplets are there, and then it's warm, and so they evaporate, and then they go off. In terms of how long that is, I can't. I'm not sure on that. I don't think it's going to be minutes. It'll be some short minutes, but really, please don't quote me on that one. That's totally a guess. I don't think it's the case that you walk into an environment that someone was infectious that was in an hour ago, and then there's still a whole bunch of things floating around in the air. It's just I don't think that's going to be the way it works.
Another question we have got is from Christian. So when it comes to buying veggies and fruit, like what is the best way to be washing them?
So anything that, when you're washing your hands, the things that apply are things like alcohol does a pretty good job at killing viruses, and friction. Now, when it comes to something like broccoli, you're going to struggle to have friction on all of the little bits, and you're probably not wanting to douse it with alcohol. But what you need to again remember is that heat kills it. So assuming you're going to cook your broccoli, then it's probably not much of a massive concern. But anything that you're not going to cook, then the same rules apply, friction. Now, I don't have any data on this, and I just don't think we're going to for a very long time. But vinegar tends to be pretty good to be washing things with in terms of vegetables as well. It gets off a lot of the things that we normally worried about, so pesticides, insecticides, etc. I'm not sure about it with coronavirus specifically, but essentially, I think use friction for things that you're not going to cook, and cook the things otherwise, and that should kill it.
Wonderful. One question we've got, I'm not sure if we have much information on this, but do we know if people will gain immunity after they have caught the virus?
Yeah, well, they should do. I mean, you essentially have two branches of the immune system. You have your what we call the innate immune system, which is kind of like you've got a whole bunch of soldiers lined up, and there's some bad guys coming, and they just start blasting away at them indiscriminately. So that's your innate immune system. And then you have your adaptive immune system. And so your adaptive immune system is something escaped the generic fire and got through. And so now we need to target that thing specifically. So we need to create a homing missile. And so that's the system that vaccinations are working with. You get exposed to whatever the pathogen is, and then your immune system develops a response to that and then remembers it. What we're not entirely sure of, and so that should apply to coronavirus. What we're not entirely sure on is, given that it's an RNA virus, it will mutate. And so I want to imagine that those who had SARS or MERS, which are again in the same family of coronaviruses, want to have some kind of immunity built up to coronavirus, maybe not total, but we don't really know that because they didn't really infect relatively anywhere near as many people. And so given that it's an RNA virus, it is going to mutate. And so you might have immunity to the strain that's going around now, but it might mutate in the future, and then you've not got total immunity. And so same kind of thing as influenza. Those that have never been exposed to influenza at all are going to be hit really, really badly. And those that have been hit with it throughout their life, they tend to have some immunity built up. Good question.
I do have another question for you. So just going back to the food and washing fresh veggies, someone just suggested, so just like when you're traveling in countries with bad water, it sounds like the best plan maybe to be avoiding eating fresh veggies that can't be easily washed. Do you think that's a good precaution?
Look, normally when we're overseas and we're worried about these things, normally we're more worried about bacterial things, because bacterial things tend to live on surfaces and then replicate there. And so bacteria, in some sense, is more classically alive, whereas viruses are not. They're alive, but they can't do anything until they get inside a host. So coronavirus is just kind of sitting there hoping that it happens to find a human or a bat, as far as coronavirus is. And if it doesn't, then it dies. Bacteria is kind of like feeding on whatever it's food it's been able to find in the environment. And so mostly when you're going overseas and you've got a big concern about fresh food, mostly it's about bacterial stuff. Whereas, you know, if the viruses are just going to die over time. But technically speaking, that might be a prudent approach, but it's not something that I would be going to the extent of myself. But we don't really know.
Wonderful. I have a question from our health coach, Shah, actually. Her question is, if I have an autoimmune disease, should I be doing anything further than what the government has recommended? Okay.
And so that's a good segue now for us to talk about the things that are more non-standard stuff that I can offer specific value on. And so I'm going to circle around and answer that question in a minute. But beyond the avoidance stuff we've spoken about, your body, some people are going to be more likely to be affected or infected than others. And so we know this because of immune compromised people. And so basically, it's if your immune system is strong, you're less likely to be compromised by coronavirus or even catch it to begin with. And so if you can keep your immune system strong, that I think is a really good, maybe the best strategy other than avoidance. And so it really does come back to extremely simple things on this, which, you know, they're not sexy, so they won't get a lot of talk time. But if you want to strengthen your immune system, the number one and the number two thing you can be doing, one, sleep, and two, don't get overly stressed. Your immune system does a lot of its work while you're at rest, while you're sleeping. That's why when you get sick, often you wake up and you feel a whole lot better. And so your immune system is doing a lot of work while you're asleep. And if you're short on sleep, then your immune system isn't given the opportunity to really focus on doing that. And the same thing applies when you're stressed. You want to think of the body as kind of like a triage nurse, in that it prioritizes whatever it thinks is the most important thing at the time. So let's say that you are running away from a lion, then the body's probably going to spend a good deal of its attention enhancing your physiological function, putting your blood flow to your muscles so you can run away from the lion. And in order for it to upregulate and attend more to that, then it has to attend less to something that's not essential. And so as far as it goes, if you're running away from a lion, but tomorrow you get an infection, we'll call it a win. You got away from that lion. And so the body does this with the immune system. And it's not even a pseudoscience thing. We can kind of demonstrate this all across the board. So 36 hours of stress will decrease your body's production of something called secretory IgA by 80%. Now, secretory IgA is your body's first line mucosal goop. That's the stuff you're putting out in your mouth and your lungs and your digestive tract. That's your innate immunity. 36 hours decreases it by 80%. And so if you want to be keeping your immune system strong, try and avoid stressing overly, which practically speaking means don't tune into sessions like this as much and be watching the news. But it also means do all of your de-stress stuff. And so those are the two, I think, big things that people will kind of forget. It's the sleep and monitoring your stress. The other things, obviously, though, are food. And so these are the 4 pillars I'm going through, right? Eat, sleep, move, de-stress. And so get a little bit of exercise, doing your social isolation stuff, and food. If you're having food that's got nothing in the way of nutritional value and a whole lot of calories, that's kind of the environment that the virus wants in order to be able to replicate. And in order to understand that, I'm going to now move on to specific immune strategies that are probably the things that people really want to hear about. And that is, I think when it comes to your immune system, there are 4 things that you want to be thinking about. Your immune system needs fuel. So in order for your immune system to function, it needs nutrients. It needs things like vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, etc. And so I think of those like the fuel for your immune system. And so that's the first thing that you can do to help your immune system along, is make sure that your body has an adequate amount of fuel, that it can do all of the things that it wants to do. And that's where food comes in. If your food doesn't have nutrients, then it's going to be taking more nutrients from your body in order just to process the food. And so it's negative value for your immune system. But if your food is loaded with nutrients, if it's nutrient dense, then you're getting that immune fuel. And so what that really comes down to, again, is really simple stuff. Have real food. Have your bright colored vegetables. Have food that you can imagine finding in nature, and it's probably going to be okay. And you can have a bit of a look around for where you can get lots of specific immune nutrients in food, and we've got some of that on the website on the Corona post. So that's strategy number 1, is immune fuel. Strategy number 2 is you can stimulate your immune system. And so it's got the fuel, you just need to tell it to work harder. And so that's things like andrographis, echinacea, mushrooms kind of fit into that strategy, medicinal mushrooms, that is. And so there's herbs and things that you can do to stimulate the immune system. So that's, broadly speaking, strategy number 2, and we're going to circle back to that for Shah's question. Strategy number 3 is borrow immunity. And that's kind of like cheat. If your immune system isn't going to do the work, then cheat and just kind of grab it from elsewhere. In the same way that when Bubs is born, Bubs doesn't really have much in the way of remembered immunity. And so they borrow it from mum through the breast milk. And so we can do that through colostrum. And so if you take colostrum, it's like borrowing immunity. Taking probiotics and having fermented foods, I tend to put in that same category. And so that's strategy number 3, borrow immunity. And strategy number 4 is kill it. And so that's if you've got some kind of pathogen, so in this case, coronavirus, what can you take to kill it directly? It's not your immune system really doing the job, it's taking something that's going to kill it. And so that, when it comes to coronavirus, is antivirals, of which there are various. There are no approved drugs, but there are compounds that are antiviral in general. And so that's things like garlic and ginger and coconut oil and curcumin. And so there's all sorts of stuff that's antiviral. And there are specific ones that have worked for SARS virus and corona group. And so there's some info of those on our website, and I can talk more about those if people would like. But to circle back to the question that was asked about what you should do if you have autoimmunity, well, give your immune system the fuel that it needs. So strategy number 1, you don't really want to be stimulating the immune system, because if you've got a condition that is characterized by your immune system being excessively active, then you stimulating it on the wrong side. There's kind of 2 branches of the immune system. And if you're pushing something that's already fast and pushing it faster, that can make your immune condition worse. And so I would avoid the immune stimulation strategy unless you really know what you're doing, or you speak to your practitioner. But you can use strategy 3, which is borrow immunity, and you can use strategy 4, which is kill stuff. Bearing in mind that kill stuff really only works after you've got something. And so to decrease your risk of getting something, give your immune system the fuel that it needs, avoid, obviously, and borrow immunity. And if you're not immune compromised, then or have autoimmunity, then stimulate your immune system works as well. Courtney.
Yeah, good. So kind of just on the back of what you've asked, just had a question come through. So if I have an autoimmune disease, would I want to be taking the supplements that support my immune system?
Well, so it depends on how we're talking about supporting the immune system. And so there's those 4 strategies. And so for immune fuel, yeah, make sure that your immune system can fight stuff off. Immune stimulation, probably not, and again, unless you know what you're doing, but borrowed immunity, that's helping your immune system, but kind of cheating. So take a whole bunch of probiotics, and that's not going to cause any problems for your autoimmune condition. If you are infected, again, that's when you start bringing in antivirals.
Wonderful. We do have a question that just popped up, just coming back to transmitting the virus on surfaces. Do we need to be worried about like walking the virus into our homes on our shoes?
That's a great question. Well, look, respiratory droplets, they're water, so they're going to be subject to gravity, and so they are going to fall down to the ground. And I remember reading something a while ago that said that there's, for any square meter of virus, of earth, even kind of out in the desert, there's tens of thousands, I think, and it might have even been higher than that, might have been hundreds of thousands of viruses that they can find. So they are on the ground, but this whole thing, whether you're walking them in, whether they're in your food on the packets, or they're on fresh food, or they're on your clothes, it all comes down to keep clean the surfaces you are in control of. And so if you knew somehow you've got has it, then you don't need to worry about your surfaces. They're going to be all fine. And in every other scenario where you're not sure, clean more the things that you're touching. And so when you're walking it into your home, probably technically it can happen, but that virus needs to get inside your body. And the way that it's primarily doing that is through the T-zone. So your eyes, nose, and mouth. And so if you're touching a contaminated surface, and so let's say that's the bottom of your shoes, and again, I'm not sure how much is going to stick there, because you do have friction when you're walking. So I imagine probably not, but again, I'm not sure. But if you were touching the bottom of your shoes and they did have a problem, and then you start wiping your face, you're probably going to have an issue. But most people are going to find that they walk around their home and they're not touching the floor a lot. And so regardless of where it is, it's only when it's really getting into the areas that you're catching it that you have a problem. And so if you're not touching your face, then you're okay. If your hands are clean and you're touching your face, then you're okay as well. And so that's why the wash your hands frequently type thing. So I think practically speaking, it's going to be impossible to control all of the surfaces, including your clothes, food, everything, but just control what you're putting near your face, or anything that you know to be contaminated.
Alrighty, 2 questions. We might make these the last 2 questions. The first one is, we've got a question about probiotics. What would be the best probiotic to be taking for your immune health? Okay,
so when it comes to any kind of treatment, we don't know, because we don't have the evidence. There are no approved treatments for coronavirus. We don't know. When it comes to probiotics, though, there are 2 conceptual ways that you should think about them. The first is, if you get a bunch of bugs that are on balance good, then probably it's going to do some good for your immune system. And in exactly which way, we're not really sure. And so that strategy is, and it's a good strategy, I don't want to poo-poo it, is to have a broad spectrum probiotic. And so that's one that's got lots of different strains in it. And so there are times that you can find that have got kind of 10+ strains. And so If you have that, then probably there's going to be some good stuff there that plays well. And that same strategy applies to fermented foods, which are essentially broad spectrum probiotics. And so both of those apply. The second is that bugs are kind of like drugs in that they have a specific effect. Now that's only relevant if we know what the effect is. But probiotics, we can have very specific effects. And so if you know all of the details about the probiotic and you know what effect you want, then you can figure it out from the strain. And so a good way to understand that is, let's say, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, sorry for time. Let's say that Courtney wanted a pet for Christmas, and Courtney's got something in mind, and then I arrive and I give her a crocodile. Probably she wasn't expecting that. She was probably expecting maybe a dog. And then she's probably got a specific dog in mind. And so if I knew it was a dog, but I arrive with a Great Dane, that's probably different than if she was expecting a Chihuahua. And so a probiotic is, we have something like Lactobacillus acidophilus NCFM. And so the Lactobacillus is like a mammal, and then dog is the acidophilus, and the NCFM is the strains, like a Chihuahua or a Great Dane. And so each probiotic is different strain by strain, and they all have their own peculiar effects. So at this point with coronavirus, we're not sure on what strains have relevance. And so I probably would be going more for the broad spectrum one, or a probiotic strain that generically speaking is helpful for the immune system. So at this point, I would be, if I was doing one thing, I would go broad spectrum probiotic. Sorry for the rant.
No, it was a good short rant. Question from Mary. She's picking up her son from overseas and driving him home in the car. If she's not able to get hold of a mask, what else can she use? Do you have any suggestions for her?
So the first thing is he should be wearing the mask. Masks are much more effective at stopping the transmission from those who are affected than to those who are not. So yeah, by far and away, a more important thing would be him to be wearing a mask. But if you can't get a mask and there are supply shortages, then maintain distance. So maybe put him in diagonally the opposite part of the car, and have airflow coming in from the outside as opposed to recirculating air in the car. Beyond that, and I don't want to suggest that this is going to be entirely effective, but if you're somewhat changing the flow of air into your respiratory tract through something like if you're wearing a scarf, it's not going to be anywhere near as effective as standard personal protective equipment, but maybe it helps a little less, so you can kind of do your own cloth thing. But I don't know entirely how effective that would be. I think probably distance distance and circulation in the car would be best things, or for him to be wearing his own mask would be best.
Alrighty, we're going to finish up with one very last question. And that is just, do we have, or what supplements do we have in stock to help with immunity? What can people get from us?
Okay, so we can help you with basically all of the strategies that I spoke about in terms of immune fuel, stimulate the immune system where appropriate, borrow immunity, and kill it. So if you are not infected and you are of standard health, so not suffering from autoimmunity, then I would go with stimulate the immune system, give your immune system the fuel it needs, and borrow immunity. And so I'd probably do a little bit from all of them. And so you can get an all-in-one product. One of the ones that we use is called Defense Complete, which basically has some immune stimulating herbs and immune fuel. And so I think that's a good one. And then if you've got a probiotic around, then that's good too. And so we can help you with those. But it kind of depends on how concerned you are and how at risk you are and how much you want to take stuff. And so we've got a lot of stuff that can help you, but you could very easily end up taking a bowl of capsules, which isn't, everyone's idea of a great breakfast. Now, personally, were I at risk or I knew I was infected, I would be doing that. But what I'm actually doing now is making sure I get enough sleep, de-stressing, taking some basic nutrients and having a little bit of support, doing some probiotics, and then doing some helpful food. So, things like your ginger, garlic, manuka honey is another good one. But the other things that you could be doing in terms of kill stuff, if you are infected, propolis, monolaurin, and there's a few things. I suppose my best answer is a little bit of generic support helps if you're just wanting to give yourself a little bit of support. And if it's a more complex thing, or you're really wanting to do everything that you can, and that's a totally fine decision, then let us know, and we can have a conversation. If you're one of our patients, then just book in an appointment. If you're on our program, that's free. And if you're not one of our patients, then you can send us a quick email, or you can book in for an acute appointment, and we can go over that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Jabe. And I hope that everyone has learned a bit and has all their questions, queries, concerns answered. So thank you for joining us this morning and asking lots of questions. They were all really great questions. We'll be sharing this session with everyone that had signed up to the webinar. You'll get a link in an email. Also, the video will also, because we're doing it on Facebook Live, that will also be still posted there, so you can go back and watch that if you want to rewatch a couple of things. If you would like further support, as Jabe was saying, so for all our current patients, please reach out to your health coaches and also book in a call with your practitioner as well. So all our appointments are now telehealth, so that just means that they're happening over the phone. If you are not a current patient of ours, so we usually work in a 6-month program, but due to the current climate, we've decided to offer our standard 45-minute consultation to those people that are not current patients, and we're calling them an Immune Health SOS appointment. So to book in, you can just go to the website, so melbournefunctionalmedicine.com.au, and it's just /immune-SOS, but we'll send you a link in the email you receive with this video, as well as we'll be putting it in the comments of the Facebook Live video as well. Sign up to our weekly webinar list as well. So next week we'll be hosting another one with our other practitioner, Rebecca Hughes. So if you're signed up, you'll get the links already, but again, it will be live streaming on Facebook Live as well. Also, make sure that you are following us on our Instagram as well, which is @MelbourneFXMed. So we'll be sharing a little bit more information from, again, our practitioners as well as our health coaches, speaking to the 4 pillars and giving you tips on how you can support yourself as well. And we will also be keeping you updated with any changes that happen that are placed by the government. We'll be keeping you updated via email as well as social media too. So stay well and maintain your healthy habits during this time. And we will see you all very soon and speak to you soon, and hopefully see you next week for our next webinar. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Courtney. Bye.